Whether you are here in person today or will be watching the recording at home, the Boca Grande Historical Society and History Center wants to thank all of you so very much for joining us today for the first lecture of our 2022 season and the formal introduction of our brand new executive director, Crystal Diff. We also especially want to thank our longtime lecture sponsor, Hazeltine Nurseries, for their continued support over many years, and to welcome our newest sponsor, the Shively Charitable Foundation, represented by Scott and Jill Shively, here today from Punta Gorda. Welcome, Scott and Jill. Crystal will tell you a little bit more about them when she speaks. We have an absolutely wonderful season coming up, and we're just trying to stay as agile as we can, as we all are with COVID. We will be offering 2 more book conversations via Zoom. February will feature the return of History Bites on Wednesday mornings at the library, plus a lecture presentation by the Blanchard House Museum of African American History and Culture, which is located in Punta Gorda. The very popular pop-up exhibits will return for a second season, showing scenes on our island then and now, and that will be a week from Friday. Our major fundraising event will be on February 8th at the Inn, we hope, for lunch and theatrical presentation of the lives of the women who made Boca Grande the place we know today. We call it Her Story. It's going to be very special. And last but certainly not least, the island's own David Futch, who joined us last year for a sneak peek, will return to launch his just published book here at Boca Grande, the official, unofficial history of Gasparilla Island. So do keep joining us as we explore the history of our island and Florida in a variety of ways. And know, of course, that you are always welcome to join us at the History Center to delve even deeper into the island's past with our archives and with our exhibits. And of course, if you're really lucky, with a chance to speak with our wonderful Jim Blaha. And now I am so pleased to introduce you to Crystal Diff, our new executive director who joined us in October. I know she is excited to present her first lecture for the Boca Grande Historical Society. She is a native Floridian and a graduate of Florida Gulf Coast University and comes to us with an incredibly strong knowledge of Florida the state, regional history, local history, and significant experience in developing programs for sharing all of this history with many audiences. She has already done 2 programs for us with the Island School. Before joining us, she worked with Charlotte County History Services, where she developed programs, events, tours, and exhibits. She has also actually been a consultant for us and our archives over the last 4 years. After her talk, Krista will be happy to answer your questions and then to greet you outside in person. That door will open and that takes us onto the pavilion stage. And we thought that would be a really nice place to be able to say hi if you'd like to stay and do so. I know you are going to enjoy getting to know her as much as we have. So turn off those cell phones and please welcome Crystal Diff. Mateys ahoy, as she has said.
Hello, everyone. I'm I'm very happy to be here today. As Pam said, this is my first lecture for you all for Boca Grande Historical Society in my new position here as Executive Director. So I'm very excited to see you all. And of course, this is my first lecture after a period of years in front of a live audience. So thank you all for coming out today so I can practice my speeches. So we're going to get into the legend of Gasparilla, but I first wanted to make a little note about our sponsors. Pam said a little bit before. We have Colonel Scott and Jill Shively. They've come to Southwest Florida upon retirement from the U.S. Air Force in 2006. They're avid supporters of local history organizations and efforts and have been volunteers with the Blanchard House Museum for over 15 years. They are the trustees of the Shively Charitable Foundation since 2016. So thank you very much for sponsoring this today. It was working before I started. Here we go. All right. So don't get scared. I'm not going to give you a test on this information, but I just want you to have a little bit of background on what was happening in Florida history before we dive into the legend of Gasparilla. You're going to see a lot of different names pop up over and over throughout the story, or even countries that were participating in this legend. There were people occupying Florida for thousands of years. The indigenous people of Florida were here. In this area, we know them as the Calusa. Then, of course, we had Spanish explorers who started coming in. 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon landed on the east coast, and then he made another expedition to the southwest coast of Florida. Then we have others who are following in his footsteps. We have Narvaez, who comes into Florida, Hernando de Soto from 1539 to 1543. We also have Francisco Maldonado. And with that, they started bringing some diseases in that really affected the indigenous people here, as well as warfare. Then we have the French, who started leading expeditions with John Ribault. Then again, going back to Spanish, so we go back and forth a lot. Pedro Menendez goes to St. Augustine, and then they start to set up Spanish missions starting in 1573. This is an important point. There were Spanish missions that were being set up throughout Florida because of the indigenous people that they wanted to convert to Christianity. The Spaniards ended up reestablishing Pensacola, and then Florida ended up going back to Britain now in 1763 at the end of the French and Indian War. Then we have Florida becoming a U.S. territory in 1821, and then officially becoming a state in 1845. So we have the Spanish, the French, the English, and then American coming in who are taking control over Florida over different periods of time. So the origin of the legend of Gasparilla comes from one man, okay? This is one man's story. This is his recreation of events of his life, saying that he knew this pirate. So everything that I tell you about the legend of Gasparilla is a big fish story that was created by none other than Juan Panther John Gomez. Many of you are fishermen here on Gasparilla Island. In Florida, we have a lot of water, a lot of fishermen, so maybe you've heard a lot of big fish tales or even told some yourself. So Panther John was very well known for his big fish stories, and he started to get a little bit of notoriety. He actually ran some fishing charters, so he ended up having a decent amount of clientele coming through so that he could tell this story. It would end up getting passed on to different people over and over again. Now, Panther John said that he was born in Portugal or France or Corsica or Honduras. It depends on which day you asked him and which newspaper reporter was there at the time. He said he was born in 1776, 1778, 1781, 1785, 1795. These are all different records that are actually held in documentation from newspaper reports. So a newspaper reporter would go out, they would write down the tale that Panther John was telling him because, again, he was getting that notoriety from all the fishing charters that he was doing. Eventually, word caught on of his amazing tale of the legend of Gaspar, and so they wanted to write it down. We think that he was actually born around 1828. This is the last one, I promise. That's the last year. So there was a federal census taken in 1870 that shows Juan Gomez, who lived on Chino Island, which was located east of Captiva Island, and he was age 42 on the census in 1870, so that would make his birth year around 1828. So that's really the only real documentation about his age that we have. Now, he said that he met Napoleon, that he fought in the Second Seminole War, that he was a blockade runner in the Civil War, and he was basically a participant in any major event that was happening in Southwest Florida in the past 100 years. He lived on Panther Key, which is near southeast of Marco Island in the 10,000 Island area. And so let me go back. So the first picture I have is from the State Archives of Florida, and this picture is actually from Wickman's Photoshop, which was here on Boca Grande. So the original photo that we have of John Gomez comes directly from this island. In this photo, in the article that is on there, it says that in the winter of 1895, he said he was 116 years old. So I'm sorry, I lied. There was one more year. What's really neat working with Boca Grande Historical Society is that I can actually use some of our own artifacts to do this presentation. This image that you see here is the glass negative that we actually have in our collection. That was the one used in the Wickman's Photoshop article that you just saw. So we have the original glass plate negative. There's a few other images, so I encourage you all to go to our online collections. That's at BocaGrandeHistoricalSociety.com, and you can look at some more artifacts that we have digitized. So how did John Gomez get from Portugal or France or Corsica or Honduras to Florida? So there was a lot going on in the 1800s, late 1700s. Basically, the more merchant ships that were going from Europe to the New World, they needed people to run their ships. So they had to recruit. So this is not directly from John Gomez, but just a piece of history that there were some different social marketing campaigns that were happening. They would put up these different flyers in the ports, and they would actually put them in multiple languages. That way, wherever you were, whatever language that you spoke, you knew which port to go to get on to whichever ship that needed you to go out on a voyage. Now, so he says that we're going to say Portugal. So from Portugal, he went out, he saw one of these ads. He was a teenager. He wanted to go on an adventure, become a man, go on a ship, and start his own life. And he ended up going to St. Augustine, which was a major port in Florida and one of the first and oldest cities in Florida and in the United States, largest occupied. So he went out and he was supposedly captured by pirates. This was not uncommon at the time. All of those really juicy merchant ships that were going by had a lot of cargo, had a lot of money that cargo was worth. So it did appeal to many people to steal that cargo. So there was a lot of piracy. He says that he was one of those unfortunate people who on the merchant ship, their entire crew was taken over by pirates. Now, this was of course, the pirate Jose Gaspar, also known as Gasparilla's pirate ship that took over his ship. Now, most of the crew was killed by pirates. But a few of them decided that they wanted to hold on and join the pirate crew instead of being put into Davy Jones' locker. So he joined the pirate crew, Gasparilla, during this time as a young man. Now, the golden age of piracy was 1650 to 1730, but Caribbean piracy, the golden age, was actually in the early 19th century. So it actually went from the 1500s over into the 1830s. So he could have still been alive during some of the leftover piracy that was happening around this time frame. So I'm sure he heard tons of stories of piracy. Now, there's a couple of reasons besides just your imminent death to join a pirate crew. If you were a merchant sailor, your shipboy salary was only $3 a year in 1800, which was only about $55 today. If you were part of a pirate crew, the ship's code of conduct would allow you to have a percent of the booty. So no matter where you were in the crew, you would get a piece of that plunder. So it was lucrative to be a pirate. So now that he is aboard Gasparilla's pirate ship, he describes Gasparilla as such. So he was supposedly the Admiral Jose Gaspar of the Spanish Navy. There are no records of an Admiral Jose Gaspar that anybody can find in any kind of records, Spanish records or otherwise. He stole the Florida Blanca Spanish warship in 1783 and made his escape and turned into a pirate. Why did he decide to leave the Spanish Navy and steal a ship? Well, some stories are different. It depends on who you ask and which story that you read. Some say that he was having some marital issues and he was possibly paying too much attention to other people's wives. So he had to escape for his life, and he did rename the ship, supposedly he renamed it to Donna Rosalita after his wife. Not sure that worked out. She has no other mention in this story of Gasparilla. So I hope she lived her life well and happy without him. Supposedly during this time, in 11 years' time as a pirate, he captured and sank 36 different ships, including the French ship the Orleans, which had $40,000 worth of cargo, which would be millions of dollars worth of cargo today. So he was pretty well off. He preferred the waters and territory of Florida's west coast, specifically the Charlotte Harbor area. It was a really nice place for him to be able to hide. There's tons of little islands that he could habitate. There have been people living here for thousands of years, so it is habitable for people, and it does give you access to fresh water. It also has a deep port, which is not always the case around some of these islands, so Gasparilla has that deep port as well. He had taken over Gasparilla Island, Yusepa Island, and Captiva Island. And like many other residents who come and visit these islands, he decided that he wanted to retire here. But he just could not help himself. He said he needed to go after one more ship. So legend has it, in 1821, he decided to attack one more ship before he went and retired. And it was a nice British cargo ship ready for the taking. And he went out with his crew, and as he boarded the ship, it ended up being the U.S. Navy's Commodore David Porter's ship, which actually, he was a real person. Commodore David Porter was a real person and was out to eradicate piracy in Florida in the 1820s. So Gaspar and his crew were fooled. They were easily dispatched by the Commodore's ship, and seeing his inevitable capture, Gasparilla decided that nobody would take him and that he would take his own life. So he actually wrapped an anchor chain around himself and threw himself into the sea. A lot of people also state that for a ship, the ship's anchor probably would have been really heavy, probably too heavy for him to just wrap around himself. So that's another part of the story that's not really realistic. But he did decide in the story drowning over his own capture. So how did Juan Gomez get out? He and a few others, a handful of others, were able to escape this entire battle that was going on and swim to the nearby islands, and that's where he ended up on Panther Key. He considered himself the last pirate. There's a picture up here of the Fort Myers Press. This is from November 29th, 1884. There are many different articles that survive today from the Fort Myers Press of the various stories and legends and dates and times from Juan Gomez's story. In 1859, he said he was 75 years old. In 1884, he was 101. In 1887, he was 111. In 1894, 113. 1895, 116. 1896, 118. And in 1900, at his death, he was 122 or 119. So, what I find really serendipitous about the entire thing is how Juan Gomez died. He actually died very similar to the story of Gasparilla. He was fishing, he had his fishing net, he actually got tangled in his fishing net, and when he threw it out into the water, he was tangled with it and ended up drowning in the ocean through that. So very similar ending, unfortunately, from the Gasparilla story to his own death. So, interesting tidbit there. So we're going to go into a little bit about the different islands that he was supposedly in control of. Obviously, Gasparilla Island, and we'll get into that. But Yusepa Island has been named a few different things over time. In 1796, it was Cayotillo Cespas, or Cespas with S-E-S-P-A-S or C-E-S-P-A-S. But in Caribbean Spanish, a lot of times they would drop the S at the end of words or between consonants, so this would actually be pronounced Sepa. So pretty close to Yusepa. In 1831, it was actually Caldez Island, named in William Whitehead's fishing rancho inventory. Jose Caldez owned fishing ranchos. He was a Cuban fisherman. There was a lot of trade back and forth between here and Cuba with fishing ranchos. In 1832, George C. Willis was assigned to Josefa Island as a customs official. And then, of course, we get into the legend of Princess Josefa de Mayorga. Princess Josefa supposedly was captured by the pirate Gasparilla in order to get some ransom money. She was supposedly the daughter of Martin de Mayorga Ferrer, who was a Spanish military officer of Guatemala and viceroy of New Spain. New Spain, I know it's a smaller picture here, but everything in yellow is New Spain. That includes a lot of what is now the United States, Mexico, so we have North America, South America, we have the Dominican Republic, Cuba. So there's a very wide area for New Spain here. So that is a very important person. So he captured her, he brought her to one of his islands, he fell in love with her, he was obsessed with her, constantly trying to get her to marry him, and she would always refuse. So he got very mad, and he said, this is the last time I'm going to ask you to marry me one more time. And she said no, and he immediately chopped off her head. But it's okay. He got very upset from chopping off her head. He regretted it immediately. He was very sorry for chopping off her head. But he couldn't put her head back on. He ended up burying her on the island and calling it Josefa. So that's how the legend kind of ties into the naming of Yusepa. But obviously, from some of our other documentation, it was probably one of these other references, not a Princess Josefa. Martin de Mayorga Ferrer, obviously, like I said, he existed, but there are no accounts of him having a daughter, Josefa. So there also, Jose Caldez actually owned a boat, Josefa, and it's registered. So we have records of him registering a boat called Josefa. There's also accounts of it possibly being named after Giuseppe from an 1860 census, where the Giuseppe ended up going and merging into Giuseppe or Giuseppa. So no princess. We also have an 1857 map. This shows Toampa Island or Caldez Island. So really it wasn't until around 1855 that people even started seeing the name Giuseppa pop up. So this is way after Gasparilla's death that you even see the name Giuseppa come out. It was known as Toampa Island or Caldez Island. There's also Captiva Island that we'll throw into the mix here. This is supposedly for where Gasparilla held his slaves or captives, but the Spanish word for captive is actually cautiva, C-A-U-T-I-V-A, not captiva. This is an anglicized version of a Spanish sounding name, if that makes sense. So in the early 1830s, the island was variously called Caldez's Island. We had different namings for this island. We have Captiva, but unfortunately, there are some references to historical documentation of there being actual slaves in this area. Jose Caldez actually owned a few slaves, so there could be connections between his slaves and the name Captiva Island. Now we get into Gasparilla and the naming of Gasparilla. The first time we see Gasparilla on a map is 1774. This predates Gasparilla being a pirate in 1782. And so we know that the naming of the island happens before the legend of Gasparilla. This is a 1774 map by Bernard Romans, and it's from the Library of Congress. And you can see right there, it says Boca Gasparilla. Boca Grande is on there, Boca Captiva, Sanibel, and the Bay of Carlos. This, we think, is actually named for a Friar Gaspar de Carvajal, who went with Francisco de Orellana on conquest to Peru in the Amazon in 1537. I could not find any records of him actually being in Florida, but he knew a lot of the conquistadors that were going into Florida. So he went to Peru in the search for El Dorado with Orellana and Pizarro. And then Hernando de Soto, who did make it to Florida, he ended up working with Francisco Pizarro as well. So there are some connections there. And also, Friar Gaspar was actually one of the head liaisons between the church and the missions. So he was a very important person for the entirety of New Spain and Spain itself having the church here in New Spain. So he was a very prominent person. And so I'm sure that his name was being reiterated in many different places. And so they probably named the island in his honor. This is another map here. This is the hydrographic description of the coast of western Florida from Punta Largo to El Cabo de Blas. And this is from Jose Antonio de Evia, and this map is from 1783. So around the same time as the legend of Gasparilla comes into play. And this actually has, and it's very hard to see, but right in this left corner here, you can see Boca de Friar, it just says Fr Gaspar. So this, again, it predates Juan Gomez and Gasparilla, Jose Gaspar, the whole thing. So, what does a train have to do with a pirate? This is another photo from the Boca Grande Historical Society collections. This is the Charlotte Harbor and Northern Railroad, so this is also available online for you to look at. Gomez created the story of Gasparilla, but he is not solely responsible for spreading this as truth. It was the Charlotte Harbor and Northern Railroad. Peter Bradley decided to use the story as a marketing ploy. Remember, Juan Gomez, his story was going out into the newspapers. He started to gain notoriety. There was a lot of talk of piracy in the area. And so he decided, well, what better way can I get people to come on my train? Let's use this as a marketing ploy. In 1904, the first Gasparilla Festival started to happen in Tampa as well. And our train line and the next port up is Tampa. So there's a lot of connections here with that. A lot of the people who were in business with the train lines, with the plant system, and all of the train systems were connected in some way. By 1907, the lines went down to Murdoch and Boca Grande, and in 1911, Peter Bradley decided to create the Gasparilla Inn. So he needed a way to bring more visitors to the island to stay at his inn. So he created this pamphlet, he wrote it down, and if it's in a book, it must be true, right? So in his booklet, he says, this is a quote from Gasparilla, taking the best of everything when a capture was made, he chose the best of the islands in Charlotte Harbor for his own secret haunts. So Gasparilla loved this island, you will too. I'm not going to go too much into the festival that happens in Tampa. Many of you should be aware at this point in time that every year they advertise for the Gasparilla Festival, and the Ye Mystic crew of Gasparilla became this elite society that put on the festival. And it was not just a festival to have fun in town, but it was a way to bring industry and more elite people from the north to bring their money and enterprise down into Florida. And I did find out that Juan Gomez actually had a close tie near Tampa and Paso Grill. He actually did some charters there. So he may have told the story to a few people over in Tampa. So this is a picture of the front of the booklet, The Story of Gasparilla, that was published by the Charlotte Harbor and Northern Railway. And we don't know the exact year that it originated, but we assume that it was around 1900 to 1904. It predated the train depot opening on the island and also the inn opening on the island, and probably had a tie with the festival, the Gasparilla Festival in Tampa. So let's dive into Gasparilla's name. So Gasparilla. In this story of Gasparilla, there's a quote, "The life and death of Gasparilla, the terror of the southern seas. His name was Jose Gaspar. Gasparilla meaning Gaspar, the outlaw." That is not what Ia means in Spanish. So the first one I'll talk about is island. In Catalan, Ia means island. So it probably was to denote this was Gaspar's island, Friar Gaspar's island. But another interesting thing that I found out is Ia is really meant for something small or cute or beloved. It doesn't mean anything for a fearsome pirate. If I was a pirate, I would not want to have Ia in my name. Some people might put it in there, but there's nothing fearsome about Ia. In Spanish, Ia again means something smaller. So if we have bomba, which is bomb, bombilla is light bulb, so something smaller. And it's derived from bomba, from bomba. Empanadilla means little, empanada. So these are not fearsome names. So even the terminology that they're using to promote Gaspar as a pirate just does not make sense. But of course, it was written down. So it was written down by Peter Bradley, who was in charge of Charlotte Harbor and Northern Railroad. He was the president. And it continued to be written into history. Unfortunately, because it was in a book, many other historians and authors decided that it was the truth, and that since it was written down in there, that they could use it as a resource for their other books that they were writing. So they perpetuated this legend as fact. In 1924, Piracy in the West Indies and its Suppression was written by Francis B.C. Bradley, and he was actually given a copy from Peter Bradley himself. So Peter Bradley gave his rendition of the story of Gasparilla to this man, and he wrote another book. And he trusted Bradley as a professional, which he was at the time, just not a historian. This reproduced the legend in its entirety and added events that actually happened to Richard Coeur de Lion, which followed Gasparilla and a few retellings of the legend. And Richard Coeur de Lion was actually a real pirate. There were real pirates in Florida, and he was one of them. In 1924, it ended up in Pirates Who's Who by Philip Gauzet, reproduced again in 1968. In 1934, we have Florida Old and New by historian Frederick W. Dow. And so this man is a historian, Frederick Dow, and so he didn't even look at the sources. And again, because it started to get reproduced in different books, people that were respected in their fields, it was never checked. It was never looked up. And Jack Beater in 1949 made the Gasparilla story really into mass marketing in the common age. This said story was verified by an old mouse-eaten manuscript and an old map, neither of which were made public. So why were there so many pirates in Florida? There were pirates here. Florida was a major area of having piracy happen. We are surrounded by water here. We were part of New Spain, and of course you have the French, the English, the Spanish, and America all fighting over who's in control of these lands over different periods of time. And of course, it would change constantly, and you would have pirates and privateers, and that would change on and off whose ships were able to be attacked by which country, and who was a pirate and who was just working for their country. So there were a lot of trade routes here. You can see they all really go around Florida. They're all very close to Florida. So Florida made a really good camping ground for pirates of any kind. There were tons of cutthroats, bandits, runaway slaves, disgruntled merchantmen. Again, they weren't making a lot of money working on merchant ships. And so many different people were flocking to this area to actually become a pirate. It was easy plunder, and you could become a privateer and just get a note saying you're allowed to take over these merchant ships for our country. You're doing a duty for your country. But piracy did not end with the Spaniards. As late as 1823, the U.S. government dispatched Commodore David Porter to the Keys to rid the coastline of pirates, including Black Caesar and Jean Lafitte. Today, Florida is rich in the history of piracy and shipwrecks. There's tons of shipwrecks. But the threat from piracy is mostly disappeared at this point in time. But of course, there are still pirates and smugglers that are still alive today, but now we have the U.S. Coast Guard to help take them down. So now we dive into Florida becoming part of the U.S. territories. And so once it became part of the Americas, they had to protect their land. So how were they going to do that? They needed to create a navy, a naval force to go around, patrol the waters, because no merchant is going to bring you any supplies, or nobody's going to export your goods if they keep getting attacked by pirates. So the U.S. Navy schooner, the USS Alligator, was constructed in 1820. And this was, again, to help eradicate piracy in specifically the Gulf of Mexico area. And I have a sketch of the Alligator from 1840. So once Spain ceded Florida to the United States, it became the responsibility of the U.S. to protect all the merchant ships. And piracy was rampant, specifically in the Gulf of Mexico. That's why they dispatched them to the Gulf. And it was a major intersection for trade, as I showed you in the previous slide. The Alligator faced a number of pirate ships in combat, especially during the spring and summer of 1822. But in November of that year, it ran aground in Isla Morada while escorting a merchant ship convoy. The crew tried to refloat the ship by taking out as many things that they could from the ship, just dumping as much cargo and as much as they could to make the ship lighter so that it would float again. But they were completely unsuccessful. So in order to keep the ship from being salvaged or being taken over by actual pirates, they set their own ship on fire. And they let it sink because they would rather completely lose the ship than have it go into enemy hands. And the wreck is now in the National Register of Historic Places. So this is a real ship. This is a real story. Piracy was a real thing that was happening at the time. There are plenty of pirates, real pirates, to talk about in Florida. Gasparilla is just not one of them. Unfortunately, the legend of Gasparilla is here to stay, it looks like, and it has really become a part of our culture at this point. But I really want to reiterate that this is a legend and that he is not part of any historical fact. But because the legend continues to perpetuate and everybody decides to create their own versions of the pirate Gasparilla, because there is no actual historic documentation, you can make up whatever you want and have it continue on. And people do. So every once in a while, you see certain things pop up in the newspapers, and they're not always very good news. A lot of it sometimes is very hurtful to our, culture and legacy here in Florida. So here's some of the aftermath of the legend of Gasparilla. Gasparilla Pirate Festival in Tampa. Every year that they have that festival means that the name Gasparilla will not go away. And it also means that this legend will continue to be told to many people, to many visitors that come to our area. And so usually they're not getting the actual history from our area, just lies and big fish stories about Gasparilla. It leads to a lot of destruction of historic sites, and a lot of them are very close by. Everybody thinks, or not everybody, but it's perpetuated that Gasparilla, because he was a pirate and he was stealing treasure from everybody, that he had some treasure that he buried in this area. So people try to find it, and they dig up everything they possibly can to try to find this treasure. It has led to the destruction of archaeological evidence on Big Mound Key. They actually bulldozed half of the island, and they took out one of the mound that was there, and so archaeologists will never be able to recover any of the information that was taken away from that bulldozer. They'll never be able to see the different layers or how everything, or the stratigraphy, how it was laid out over time. They'll never be able to get that information back. Usually a lot of the treasures that come from these mounds and middens does not have anything to do with gold, but actual information on how these people lived and the history and prehistory of these people here. Hog Island, and also Alligator Creek in Punta Gorda. There have been some treasure hunters that go out there and try to dig up different sites as well. We have mounds and middens all throughout Florida, especially around Southwest Florida here. So every time you see a mound, please leave it alone. Don't dig it up. You can contact Florida Public Archaeology Network or an archaeologist and make sure that somebody knows about that mound and just leave it alone. There was an article, The Search for the $30 Million Treasure by William and E.R. Hartley. And this picture that I have up here is the hand of Gasparilla. Did you know they found his hand? It's a pretty small hand. And so this happened actually not too long ago. It happened just a few years ago, and the Tampa Bay Times wrote an article, so this picture is from there. Tampa family finds a good pirate story in the attic. So supposedly, the family says in 1930s, Ernesto Lopez found a box working in downtown Tampa. The box contained Spanish and Portuguese coins, the severed hand with a wedding ring engraved with Gaspar. I don't know why he would have his own name on his wedding band. Married to yourself. It's the best way to go. All right. Treasure map of Hillsborough River with the hand actually drawn onto the map. I am not a conservator, but the map does not look like it's from a very long time ago. It doesn't look like it's from the 1800s. I'll say the oldest it could possibly be is the 1930s, probably closer to the 60s and 70s, or maybe even later than that. So supposedly this family found this treasure. They told the newspaper, they told the news, they tried to get the story out, they wanted a little bit of attention for this, but they wouldn't let anybody actually investigate any of it. Just, this is all we have is the picture. And yes, you will be arrested if you try to find Gaspar's treasure and you end up on an archaeological site. In 1992, 4 men were arrested for damaging Hog Island and Big Mound Key. So yes, people were arrested for the damages that took place there. And it is very extensive what will get taken away from you. Anything that you used for that mission can be taken away, including your vehicles or your house. This is another one from the Charlotte Sun in 2018. Treasure hunters scour the Peace River. And this also led to destruction of many archaeological sites. Again, when anybody tries to dig for treasure at these sites, we all lose. We all lose the information of the people that lived here previous to us, previous to European exploration. They had no formal writing system, so all that we know of them are the things that they left behind. And that is going to conclude my presentation for today. I do have a lot of sources, and if any of you are ever interested in learning more about the pirate Gasparilla or about our history on the island, you can feel free to email us at Boca Grande Historical Society. Our business cards are up front, so you can take one of those, and I'd be happy to send you any information that I have available so that you can research a little bit more on your own. There is so much information about this topic, about piracy, about Gasparilla, about Charlotte Harbor and Northern Railroad, and all these different people that were a part of the story and the legend of Gasparilla. Much more that I could possibly give you within an hour's time. So, thank you all for trudging along with me through the legend of Gasparilla, and I apologize for anybody's bubble that I burst about the legend of Gasparilla. I hope you all learned a little bit today, and again, if you have any questions, you can meet with me outside. Thank you.